basically an opportunity for us to show you some strategies, and tonight's content is very rich in complex strategies. So for those who are just starting out, some of it may jump ahead. For those of you who are existing clients of ours, welcome back. For those people who are new to us, a little bit about our business. Here's the disclaimer that I have to do from a legal point of view. Tonight's presentation has been prepared without taking into account the objectives, financial situation or needs of any particular individual attendee. This information is educational in nature, and if any of this information is perceived as advice, then this advice is general only. We encourage those looking to make any future investments to consider the appropriateness of any investment to your needs and before taking any action to ensure that you've built adequate knowledge and seek professional advice or guidance from a qualified and, if applicable, licensed professional. The examples used tonight are for illustration purposes only. So a little bit about us. Very simply, we're a professional wealth advisory business. We have a bias towards residential property as an investment vehicle, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about residential property as a vehicle to create wealth. Our mission, purpose, goal, whatever you want to talk about, is to help our clients build substantial passive wealth. This is not about quitting your job and doing this full time. This is about sitting back and letting these investments just take care of themselves. We have property advisory, mortgage broking, money and wealth advisory, financial planning, and also private client roles areas. So what are the purposes? Well, we're here to provide knowledge and education around finance, money and investing. We want to instill a mindset of confidence and belief that financial well-being is possible for all of us. We want to encourage action amongst attendees to change their wealth outcomes. That's what we do, and this is what these education sessions are about. 3 sessions tonight: money and wealth planning. This is the detailed session. This is what sets up the night. We're then going to look at a defence strategy, which is basically personal insurances to make sure that if you're going to embark on this journey, that you've got adequate risk mechanisms or minimisation strategies around you. And then we're going to hear tonight from Kate Bakos, who is a successful property investor. She's got a lazy 17 properties that obviously create passive wealth for her. So we're going to hear from her mistakes and also her successes. So we're looking forward to that. For those of you who haven't been to one of our sessions before, this is what we consider our wealth creation model. This is basically our concept around money and investing. So what we're seeing here is having a plan, having defence, which is basically minimisation strategies, the execution and engaging that execution. There's obviously always changing road ahead, cash flows, borrowings and asset selection. So we're going to be covering off quite a lot of this tonight. In my presentation we pretty much cover off everything. And then Michael's presentation is going to focus specifically on defence, and then we're going to look at how Kate's gone about executing and how she's achieved her outcomes. Make sure I've got my pointer. And of course, along the way, if you need help, get it. Not everyone creates wealth just off, out of the water. So let's start. Why are we educating them about money and wealth planning? Well, we believe it's impossible to build substantial wealth through property investing without implementing a sophisticated cash flow strategy and developing a long-term plan. But I suppose first and foremost is, if we wanted to be honest with you, we don't believe people can actually manage their money very well at all. And that's not just us making an observation. We make that observation every day, but it's also about trying to say to people that if you wanted to be honest with yourself, there's not a lot that can actually go right with your money plan if you don't have advanced strategies. In 2007, the government was concerned about this, so they got Paul Cicero to actually do a financial literacy foundation report. And this was basically a self-assessment of 2,500 people around their ability to manage their own personal household finances. What's interesting about this is it's a personal assessment. So they're actually rating their own ability to manage money. So it was a fascinating report to read. Here's some of the report findings and basically then the reality of the situation, which enhances my point before. 90% of us say we have the ability to do a budget. We take a look at the reality. This is the level of household stress that's currently in the marketplace. So there's obviously a lot of people who don't have the ability to actually budget for themselves. In terms of our ability to save, again, self-assessment, 88% of us say we have the ability to save money. The reality is, ABS statistics indicate that since 2001 we haven't saved a cent as a nation. Protecting our money, 82% of us say we have the ability to choose adequate insurance. I had a question, a bit of audience interaction here. Put your hand up if you've got life insurance protection. I'm expecting most of you, probably in your super funds, you've got those as well. Income protection. Good to see. Still a few hands up, but I'm looking for 82% of the audience, and I don't have that. What about total permanent disability? Nice, some good numbers. What about trauma cover? Couple as well. So great. Obviously, I'd expect an audience like you to have a greater percentage because you're taking the time to educate yourself on creating your own wealth outcomes. But to me, they're essential because if we lose our ability to manage cash flow, we lose our ability to create wealth. So if we can supplement that through these insurance policies, it's well worth the effort. Michael's going to talk about those in more detail in the second presentation. Investing, this is the interesting one. 69%, so we're still a little bit cocky about our ability to invest. Okay, we still think we're pretty good at it. But in the same report, 66% of us said we wouldn't consider risk and return when making our investment decision. How does that work? So we think we're okay, but the reality is that's gambling. We're letting someone else make those decisions for you. Here's my favourite and the one I'm passionate about. It's planning for retirement. Are we able to do this? Well, as far as our own self-assessment of our situation, 81% of us believe we have the ability to plan for long term. And here's the shocking realities. ABS data indicated of people 65 years or over are currently living on a household income of $23,800 per annum. It's not living. Average household aged between 55 and 64 have a total nest egg or superannuation fund of $142,000. And this is the one that we want to impact on. Only 10% of retired population households have income of greater than $46,000 per year. 10% of the retired population. So when you talk to your friends and family who've got people on pensions and who are struggling, they are. They don't have a lot of money. Now, they don't have the luxury of the compulsory super that we have, but that's still not going to be enough. We continue on. Let's have a further audience participation. Who knows their retirement date? And actually, put your hand up. This is your desired retirement date. Everyone should know that. It was yesterday, wasn't it? You know, we want to retire yesterday. What about our desired income in retirement? Yeah, a truckload. As much as I need. Yeah, so we all should still have our hands up. Do we know the wealth base that we need to generate that money? Do we have any idea? We've got a few people here, but remember 81% of us were saying, yeah, no, we know that. Have we got a written plan to get us there? And a detailed step-by-step strategy? Anyone? There's a couple, good. I'm expecting about 1%. Okay, does that strategy and plan have month-by-month calculations? One. And that's all right, she's a property multi-millionaire, everyone. Having blind. So 81% of us say that we have the ability. Do we? The reality is that we don't. People think about retirement when they get closer to retirement. It may be too late. We have this problem where we haven't created a big enough investment nest egg to make our retirement the desired retirement that we were looking for. It's often too late to make significant differences as well. So by the time people are starting to think about retirement, you're actually already very close to it. So we don't have these long-term visions and we need to change that attitude. So we've got limited options moving forward. We're going to have to keep working. Okay, so we don't actually get to retire. We potentially could have aggressive strategies. So we think we've lost all this time, so we're just going to have to take riskier decisions. That shouldn't be the case, and certainly a financial advisor would be saying, as you're transitioning to retirement, protecting that nest egg is what it's all about. We're forced to accept, and this is the big one, we are actually be forced to accept a lower quality of life and standard of living in retirement. Similar to 90% of the population who are currently retired, who retire on less than $46,000 a year. Now it's serious stuff, but you guys know that because you come along tonight. So we say we have the ability to manage money, but the reality is we don't. The reality is we lack the knowledge and understanding that's required to get us to those wealth outcomes. We lack the action, the application, and potentially the discipline to see it through. First and foremost, from my observations in helping hundreds and hundreds of people a year, is when we have the initial consultation with people, they don't even see this as a problem yet. It's just not on their radar. It's just such a forward thing that I just need to make sure I've got enough for today. So we've got to start thinking more about that we do have a problem if we don't treat it. And the excuses, they're everywhere. Not interested, boring. You know, until you have no money, it's not interesting. What about when it's not important? You know, money doesn't buy happiness, all of these types of things. What if you've got someone who's critically ill, who needs an operation from an absolute specialist, and you want to fly that person in from anywhere, or take your child somewhere, anywhere in the world to get them better? Money important then? What options do you have if you don't have that money? So money isn't happiness. Let's make no mistake about that. But to say it's not important, well, I think that's an understatement. It's too hard. It is very difficult to put a complex strategy together, but that shouldn't be the reason why you don't do it. There's no one out there who can help. Well, there are people out there who can help. Or the best one, I can't find the time. I can't find 2 to 3 hours a year or to initiate the starting process, and then around 20 hours a year. I mean, they're just excuses. So ultimately, if it is to be, it's up to you. There are vehicles that you can use and you can make a difference to your own wealth outcomes, and that's what we want to demonstrate to you tonight. So your opportunity. Basically, you need to understand what's happening in your situation, and you need to understand that now. So you need to do the exercise of forward wealth projection. You need to understand where you're going to finish up, because you have an opportunity to change that course. You need to understand what destination you're shooting for, rather than just, strategy after strategy after strategy after strategy, changing tacks. I see that quite often too. Well, if your end goal is to achieve a certain outcome and a certain level of wealth, you shouldn't need to change that strategy if it's planned out. There might be bumps on the road and detours, but ultimately if you've got a goal, then you should be able to achieve it. Sophisticated and complex money management to build wealth is not easy. The subject matter is difficult. Just putting this presentation together is very difficult, because I could go off on tangents and speak on the subject for hours. So we are going to be talking about a lot of moving parts together. To try and illustrate this was also a difficult process, but we're going to give it a go and show you what we've come up with the remaining 40 minutes of this presentation. So let's get into it. So how much money do you need to retire on? How much? Does anyone have any idea? Well, let's have a look. This is what Westpac and the Australian Super Fund Association, they do this quarterly assessment of what is considered a comfortable retirement. For a single person, it's $39,000 a year, and for a household, couple, $53,000 a year. Now, there are all the numbers up there, but what does it really mean? It enables an older, healthier retiree, they've got to be healthy, because that's going to buy out your costs straight away, to be involved in a range of broad leisure activities and recreational activities, to a good standard of living through the purchase of such things as household goods, private health insurance, a reasonable car, good clothes, a range of electronic equipment, domestic and occasional international holiday. So would everyone be happy with the occasional domestic and international holiday? You've retired. Like, that's just surviving, guys, with a little bit of, I suppose, sugar on top, but that's it. There's not much more there. Now, for us to generate that type of retirement without touching our capital base, meaning that we're not eating into that savings that we've made, we need to build a wealth base, hopefully everyone can see that, of 1,074,000. Now, if that's 35%, that's roughly 53,000. That's what you need. Now, we just saw before that the average household about 142,000 in retirement. Okay, this is a busy slide, and obviously from the reflection, I'm sorry if you can't see this clearly. I want you to start by looking at what your household income is. So just focus on your line, okay, and we'll move forward from here. Total income until retirement. So this couple's aged 35. They've got 32 years before their technical retirement date is due. Incomes grow at 3%. Okay, super investment returns of 6%. Superannuation guarantee of 9%. Tax at 15 cents. Now, the big outcome here is, guess what? A $60,000 household a year is going to generate $1.3 million in income over the next 32 years. 1.3 million. What you do with that money is going to ultimately determine your wealth outcome and how much you're going to be able to live on today and tomorrow. $100,000 household, 5.2 million. Okay, this is what the super balance is assumed at age 35. So this is their current balance for those who've been fortunate enough to get super from the day they started working. Projected super balance as at 67, and then brought back to what we call net present value terms. So that's what your super is going to be worth. So if you're following your own line, and look at this, estimated retirement income 4%. So even someone who's earning $200,000 a year, just paying their 9% compulsory super, is going to end up with $54,000 unless they can contribute more to investments. So these people here have got a certain lifestyle that they're accustomed to. Imagine the shock and horror of them basically dropping their income dramatically. So it's important that we start looking at creating a wealth now. So I'm going to talk about what is sophisticated money management, but I also need to address a common mistake. This is not sophisticated money management. A budget tells you an outcome of, and it's very hard to see, that's 24,000. So this couple here, who we're demonstrating tonight, this would be their budget. This is Jason and Amy. So they've got a surplus each year of $24,000. And what they're doing here is basically just looking at a set of numbers. A standard budget fails to measure and manage wealth creation or wealth building because it's far too simplistic. It's rigid. It's not dynamic. It's not measuring cash flows. It's not looking forward. It's just showing I might be able to save something. It doesn't allow for forward projection outcomes, doesn't show taxation benefits, indexation of money, asset appreciations, none of that. Yet that's part of a wealth strategy. Income's important, but so is capital growth. So in most cases, it's usually used as a retrospective tool, a classic. Where the hell did all that money go? We need to do a budget. We need to just see where it's all going. Seeing where it's all going is looking in the past. We need to look ahead. It's usually implemented with a single goal in mind, i.e. you're starting out on this journey. Look, it's better to have a standard budget than nothing at all, but I'm telling you it's not a wealth creation tool. All it's going to do is potentially help you estimate when you're going to have a certain amount of savings. But that's not creating wealth. Working with such a limited tool, and I'll be demonstrating this later, will be a cost. You will lose wealth creation ability by doing basic calculations. So what is sophisticated money management? Again, there's a hell of a lot of moving parts. There's cash flow coming in, there's expenditure going out, there's investments, there's return on those investments, both yield and capital growth. There's a multiple of moving arms and pieces and cogs to this beast. It's almost got a life of its own. So inside your packs, there is an educational piece around that, but I'll just continue on this point. So understanding the cash flows that are coming in and how we can obtain cash flow, Long-term cash forecasting is important. Multiple transactions and objectives. Conservative assumptions around incoming cash flows, and overstated assumptions around outgoings. So in other words, if we've got a certain amount coming in, we understate that. If we've got bills to pay, we slightly overstate that. Not to a point where it paralyses to inaction, but we've got to make sure we've got cash flow, because cash flow is king to any strategy you're putting together. Investment cash flows and growth assumptions, taxation, inflation impacts, access to finance and tax-effective finance structuring, forecasting of what these variables will do and how they'll impact on your cash flows. So as I mentioned before, inside the kits that you picked up tonight, you'll have this piece in here. Now, of course, we don't give you how to manage it all. That's an enormous strategy and structure, but these are all the things. You can't see them up here, but there's a list of about 50 variables you need to assume when you're doing sophisticated cash flow modelling. We're going to show a live demonstration of how it all works. Okay, this slide gets busy, so stay with me, because this is us trying to illustrate how all these pieces of the puzzle come together. Where is our source of cash flow? We can work for it. We dedicate a third of our lives, a third of our time on this planet to generate income, usually. We have investment returns. We have tax office helping us. And this one here, which is property equity, okay, via the bank. Now I'm going to break out and show you exactly what this means. So equity is a form of cash flow. How is it a form of cash flow? Let's study this and we'll show you how. So we've got an investment property, and it's a $350,000 purchase, and it's got to cost us around 5% to buy it. So $367,500 when we add stamp duties and buying costs. Over here we've got the value of our current home, $650,000. We've got a debt of $270,000. So the equity we have in our house is $380,000. Now, to buy this, in an illustration of here of how cash flow can be generated from equity, I'm taking a loan from the bank of $250,000. I'm going to allocate only $100,000 to that purchase, which means that I've got to borrow $267,500 against this security, but I've got funds to complete that purchase. The other $150,000 is going into my pot of cash. Now, I don't have to pay interest on that until I actually start using that money, but that's going to buy me time and it's going to buy me protection. Now, how does it buy me time? Well, I'll explain that in a moment in terms of how you can manage that cash flow and release it out as you need to, if you need to at all. That's your buffer. That's the money we set aside for the long-term and short-term strategy. So coming back to this, that's how money gets added to your pot through equity in your property. Where does it go? It goes on bills, regular repayments, groceries, living, surviving, enjoying, lifestyle. And then some of it also should be put aside for those future needs. Because life gets in the way. We're going to have family, we're going to have obligations, we're going to have to ensure that we've kept enough of this aside for that as well. Because there's no use in buying a property only having to give it up in 2 or 3 years when you've decided to start a family or something along those lines. Here's the most important thing. Whatever we track and bring through to the other side, that surplus cash, that's the only way we can create wealth. Okay, we can't create wealth because all the money's allocated and used. So the use of that surplus cash, we've got limited options. We can retire debt, which is traditional ways in which we were taught. We can put that money into savings, or we can potentially put it into leveraged investments. So in other words, we can put it into borrowings, which means that we can control a greater asset that appreciates. So let's go back to our property purchase example. We've got our $350,000 property. Remember, we've got our pot of cash. We've paid the deposit, or $100,000 out of that, and we've left $150,000 still in the pot. We're going to get 4% rental yield, so around $14,000 going back into the pot. We're then going to see the debt, and I've assumed that at 8% interest only, at $29,400. So where does the shortfall come from? Well, traditionally, the mindset is we've got to work for that. It's got to come from our income that we're producing. True, but it could also have come from this pot, from that $150,000 that we set aside. In this illustration, I'm showing that we've got the cash flow shortfall, which is a calculation of 29 less than 14. So this property is running at a technical loss of $14,500. Now, we don't go into business to lose money. So if you're going to adopt this strategy, you need to make sure that that asset is going to appreciate. There's so many people dabble in investment property because they're being referred to by whomever, and they're trying to sell you that property. You should be getting independent advice on that asset selection. Okay? So ultimately what's happening here, we've got a shortfall or a loss. Now the tax office comes to the party, and in this illustration I'm only using 30 cents in the dollar, which is the majority of us who've got income coming in. So we're going to get $4,620 back into the pot. So in essence, this property is going to cost us $207 a week to hold. Now I mentioned before they had 24,000, and we'll talk more about Jason and Amy in a moment. But that $207 per week to hold. How long could they hold that property if they weren't generating the income and they were just using their equity? They had $150,000. So technically they could hold that asset for 14 years without actually generating more income. Yeah? So if, let's say, we held it for 10 years, now remembering our debt shouldn't be going up. It only would be going up if we're actually using debt to service debt. In other words, we're interest capitalising. But if we were making the minimum repayments and covering the shortfall, then technically our debt wouldn't grow. In 10 years' time, at 7% growth, that property would be worth $688,000. In 20 years' time, if it continues to grow at 7%, it's worth $1.3 million. And you can see here, all of a sudden, it's cash flow positive in a long way. So ultimately, where's the debt going to be retired? Potentially from the generation of that. And then once you pay that off, who gets that money? You do, as part of your income in retirement. Why are you selling these assets? They produce income indefinitely as long as they're rented. Am I worried about capital gains? Why would I be worried about it? I'm not going to sell them. Only the kids I have are going to worry about that, and what a terrible problem they've got. You know, I'm going to give them millions of dollars in investment properties, and they're going to have to worry about paying, $100,000 in tax. Oh, problem. I think it's a problem they'd like. So let's have a look at the difference of controlling a $650,000 asset, which is our home, which is not producing income at all, and then we just whack a $350,000 property, projected over 20 years, 3.9 million versus 2.5. So we've got a $1.4 million variance. And remember, this costs us $207 a week to hold. If it trends like we expect it to, you're making $471 a week. Passive income, what are you doing for that? Are you actually managing the property? No, you've got a property manager. Don't get involved, get a professional to do it. So what we're talking about here is one isolated example. What if we put multiple strategies together and roll them over? Because we've also got to live. We've also got to service debt. We've also got to put food on the table. So let's talk about Jason and Amy in a little bit more detail. They're 35 years of age. They've got an income, which is, yes, above average income, $150,000. But we have illustrations in our business of people on less, and we're going to do some people who are older in age as well when we do the modelling tonight. Property worth $650, debt of $271, equity in property $379, super balance $176, and remember these guys wanted to retire in 32 years at age 67. They'd actually like to retire earlier, but it's ultimately up to us to help them do that. And they want $80,000. So they want to end up in potentially the top maybe 3-4% of the nation who are retiring. Because remember, 10% retire at only $46,000 a year. Now they've come to us because they're interested, there's a lot going on in their lives, so they want to know whether they should start a family. They've done really well so far, they've created a nice amount of equity, And they've just got to understand what's the best consideration for them, because they're worried if they start a family, can they actually afford to buy an investment property and start their family? And these are all the things they're looking at: childcare, time off work. We're going to go down to one income, possible renovations, daycare costs, school fees, etc., etc. So this is where it becomes very difficult to do a standard budget to model this. So all of these costs are going to be assumed in what we're looking at now. I'm going to introduce you to Michael Pope. Michael Pope is the head of our Money and Wealth Planning Division. And I'm now going to stand over here while Michael takes us into our actual wealth projection technology tool that we use. We've spent around 18 months designing, developing and enhancing this tool. And this is basically where we're going to show you what's possible. And you're going to see some of these examples. Keep talking. I'm trying to avoid it. So the first thing we look at when we're talking about outputs is the inputs. The better the inputs, the greater the projections we can deliver. So the more we know about your situation, or the more you know about your situation, the better wealth outcomes you'll be able to model and then make more informed decisions. So we do that by capturing this information. So we grab your basic details, your date of birth, and some standard information on the first page. We're going to pick up some time here. We're going to look at the incomes, so we know about those incomes. Bill payments, so you can see demonstrated here yearly, quarterly, every 2 months, whenever they are, all of the series of these bill payments. Now I'll make note, we've got income protection in there. You'll notice that we don't have life insurance in for this couple. It's in their super. Okay, so you can actually pay for life insurance through super. But in this illustration, we've got $2,000 a year in income protection. Again, we lose that ability for cash flow, we lose our ability to create wealth. Moving through quickly, we'll keep going. Spending, this is what we spend in groceries, food, alcohol, lifestyle, discretionary, travel. All of these types of things are what's enjoyable in our life now. Now, we're not telling you also to go and live on crackers and toast so you can get a better wealth outcome. This is also about making sure that you're also enjoying yourself as well. If we've got some surpluses there, we can put them to work. Assets, you saw that before, our super, our household, those type of assets. We've got a couple of motor vehicles, but they don't appreciate in value, do they? They're a big drain on wealth creation. So we've got those as well. We've got no investment properties at the moment. We've got borrowings, 271, interest rate 725. We've got a credit card that we pay that off all the time. That's our situation as it currently stands. So in summary, we've got Jason and Amy bringing home net income of 62 and 52 respectively. Sorry, just scroll up for a sec. Paying $35,000 in tax. Thanks for the new road, Jason and Amy. Very nice of you to contribute to that. So ultimately there's a way in which we can reduce that tax if we're running the properties at a loss. We've got monthly expenditure of $7,544, which leaves them with a surplus of $2,055. That 24 grand a year. Okay, so let's just remember that. We're now going to move across, and we're hoping this will, it's a very complex bit of software this, so we're hoping it will remain stable for us for the illustration purposes. If we scroll down here, Michael, thank you. These are the assumptions. We've got multiple working tables up here, but here's the assumptions that we're using. Income is growing at 3% per annum, so it's indexed. Superannuation, when you retire, is growing at 3% per annum. Deductions, not to worry about now. Spending, annual growth 3%. Super contribution, 15, 9 and 15 respectively, etc., etc. Savings modelling, you put money in the bank in an at-term call deposit, we're only giving you 3%. Remember, we're going to be conservative on incomes. Growth rates on residential property 7%. Purchase expenses 5%. Growth rates, rental yield 4%. Occupancy rates 97. If you're buying in areas where there's lots of vacancy, not a good investment, bad asset selection. Management expenses, we're outsourcing the management of property at 7.7. Maintenance expenses, a big one. A lot of people miss this in their calculation. we maintenance at 1.5% on a property. So of the value of the property. So you're thinking, well, that's a lot of money. Well, we always like to be overestimating cash out. Okay, other investments, 7%, yield 4%, purchase expenses 1%, and then loan repayments at 7.25 as well. So we've got enough information to actually demonstrate a wealth outcome for this client. And we're looking at these now. So the first one for this client is, you know that $2,000? If you're blowing that money every month on your life now, this is your situation. So let me introduce this graph. The blue represents your owner-occupied home. The white represents superannuation. The yellow line here, if you can see it clearly, represents debt. Up here we've got at retirement in 2043 net worth of 8.2. That's in future dollar terms. So we bring that down and we tell you that that's only $1,019,000 in today's dollar terms, in net present value. If we were getting a 4% return on that money, we'd be living on $40,000 a year. So that's if they use all of that $2,000 a month. The next illustration we're going to look at is if we pay down debt. We've been taught to pay down debt, so if we pay down that debt, the interest we save is $96,000. Not a bad strategy, $96,000 made. The assumption here is that once you pay it down though, guess what? All of that money moving forward is then burnt on living and lifestyle now. Okay, just an illustration. The next illustration we're going to look at. What if we paid that debt down and then put 50% of that surplus income into super, which is returning 7%. Starting to look at our numbers, the real numbers are what we want to focus on here. We've got $2 million at retirement, which is going to deliver us $80,000 in retirement. Now that's all well and good, but we haven't had kids yet. Let's play around with that a little bit. So if they weren't going to have kids and all they wanted to do was basically put 50% into additional super, they're going to go okay. Okay, 80,000 is pretty good. Not enough yet, but pretty good. So that gives you an idea of what's possible. Now we're going to start playing around with all of the variables that they've asked us to consider. So we're back into future plans. Now they said they wanted to have a child. So we've pre-populated a couple of these for speed purposes. Initial cost, 10 grand out of our cash flow pot. Once off in February of 2013. A new car, $40,000. Home renovations, $30,000. Round the world anniversary holiday. Again, this is about enjoying ourselves as well. Not used to having it in retirement. A once off $25,000 in 2031, which is their 25th wedding anniversary, as an example. Down here, the maternity leave. Amy's got to go and come off work for a year, and she's not going to get any income during that period. So we've got to assume that she's got no income. Additional living costs for the child, well, we've got to look after this kid, $400 a month. Childcare, $624, which represents around 3.5 days of childcare a week to 4 days a week. School fees, primary school, we're estimating $1,000 a year, and then secondary school, $10,000. Now that's sort of a semi-private school. But we could put 20 grand there, again, this is for illustration purposes. Okay, and that duration of those for that period of time. There we go. So automatically that's just dropped around $400,000 off our wealth base and brought our retirement income down to $66,000. That's cost, that's having a family, that's not saying everyone stop having kids. We need someone to be in the workforce when we retire. So ultimately, for illustration purposes, that's basically what we're looking at to say, yes, that child is going to cost you. Now, the next thing we want to do is add an investment property. They wanted to know whether they could actually afford an investment property whilst they also had a family. So we're going to go back in and add an investment property. And we're going to pay $350,000 for this investment property. And we're going to buy that in the next 12 months. So we're going to try and start a family, buy the property, run the household, do all of these things concurrently. So we're looking at that, wow, one investment property, $118,000 in passive income. Looks pretty sexy. Problem with it is, is the cash flow there? Because all this is just a projection tool. So what's behind it, please, Michael? What's sitting behind all of this, you can see, is we've got calculations per annum. For our clients, we actually do calculations per month for 40 years. And you can see these are the years, the tool is that complex that it takes about 4 minutes to calculate each transaction. So we're only doing it in our yearly tool tonight. You can see from here the cash flows, we're negative because we've got the renovations happening, we've got Amy off work. We had $44,000 in savings that we've been able to pay redraw at the time as well. But you can see, based on this information, if we just scroll across, cash flow surplus is there, yep. Just go back to the projection, Michael, and see if we can work it out from there. The testing we did on this said that they actually couldn't afford it. From a cash flow point of view, they're actually going into a negative cash flow position. So what we wanted to illustrate, which is what we're going to do now, is remember we talked about putting a buffer account together of $150,000? Well, could we actually take out that equity, park it into a buffer account, and still try and achieve the wealth outcome whilst servicing the debt on that $150,000? So what Michael's going to now look at is adding a buffer loan, which is the $150,000 out of the equity that we've got in our current home. Remember, we put $100,000 into the property as well as getting a loan against that property. We're putting that $100,000 in. So we're kicking up that pot of gold, that cash flow pot, to see whether we can actually still survive and get ourselves an investment property and make sure we can trade through that period. Because as you're growing, as the asset value is growing, and I'll try and illustrate this while Michael's having a look at the situation. If this is the curve line, the growth curve line of the value of a property, you can usually predict that there's a correlation between the growth and how you can increase the rental yield on the property. Got that the wrong way. Sorry. The rental yield on the property. So as the value of the asset's growing, so is the income you're generating from that property. In a technical sense, is the debt growing? It might have some bumps for interest rate increases and decreases, but at some point in time, it moves from a negative position to a positive cash flow position. So what Michael's trying to illustrate is that as you're moving through that area, you're basically going to see a situation where if we can find cash flow from somewhere else to service this shortfall time period, then we should be able to hold on to that asset. Does that all make sense? Sort of, kind of, maybe. I told you it's complex. How are we going?
I found the problem. We were giving them too much rental income on the properties. I've taken that out. So now we should be able to go back and quickly demonstrate that in fact they can't afford that property at the moment.
Okay. So you can see here, we call it a reverse mortgage. It's basically a danger zone where we can't find any money in the system. So it's basically saying we'll just grab the equity out of the house then. Well, you're not going to do that. Okay, so ultimately we're going into negative territory during that time. So by putting in this new buffer account, we will be able to trade for that property. And again, this is an aggressive strategy. But it's only aggressive if you're not comfortable with the numbers. And they're your numbers, remember? This is what you spend every week, month, fortnight, whatever it may be. What we're trying to do is say to these people, and in this particular illustration, you can see that they were negative for around 6 years. So ultimately, what most people will do, and this is a really important point, most people would wait 6 years before they started investing. Now, by us putting that in, you can see that we don't go into any red zone. So by putting that buffer in play, we were able to grab that property now, in the next 12 months, not in 6 years. If we had waited 6 years, well, let's have a look at the outcome. So remember this number, 106,000.
Just remembered it for you.
Thank you, you saved it. You're very rude. So we're now going to go and say, well, if we bought in 6 years from now, so assuming that's our 6 years from today, now that's our 6-year line, then technically a $350,000 property today, we're going to say we're waiting 6 years. So in the way in which our system calculates, that's the equivalent of a $233,000 property in today's terms. That's how our system models. So Michael's put $233,000 in today's dollar terms. And that's the difference. So these are the numbers I want you to focus on. You've just, in future dollar terms, you cost yourself $1 million. In present value terms, you've cost yourself $400,000 by waiting. Now that's factored in all the cost of holding that money. It's factored in all the interest. It's factored in everything. And guess what's technically going to happen? Are you ever going to get that money back? If that property keeps growing at that level, but you started here, when you retire, that's a loss. You will never make that money back unless you have tremendous luck in terms of picking amazing investments that outperform or whatever it may be. But in a technical sense, you will never be able to get that money back. So you just cost yourself $400,000. So all we're trying to illustrate is that if you know your cash flows and you're comfortable with those cash flows and you've done wise forward planning of what provisions for your money that you need today, tomorrow, next week, next year, 30 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, you're going to be in a great position. Okay, Michael's now just changing us back to that position. We're getting a bit of feedback there. Is that my phone ringing? So Michael's now reset us back to that situation. And the next thing we're going to look at, Michael?
Interest rates?
Interest rates. I've supercharged myself. How about I just talk like this for a minute? Maybe I can project my voice. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a situation now where people say, well, what if interest rates go up? What if we can't afford to buy that property because we're going to run out of cash flow? Well, remember, we've just built this big buffer. So what we're now going to illustrate is if interest rates go to 9%. So Michael's now changing all of our projections to all debts that we had, other than credit cards and so forth, and now at 9% interest. What does that do to our wealth projection? Shock horror. We lose about 100 grand in net worth. So should interest rates be a reason why you should stop investing? And you're still going to have a nice little passive income of $100,000 a year in 32 years from now. So interest rates, the cost of money versus the return that you're going to get from the growth as well as the yield, shouldn't be an issue. If you want to put it at 11%, 12%, you would still have a better wealth outcome. And it shouldn't stop you. So the point being, interest rates are just part of the game. They're part of the moving cogs in the overall puzzle. So Michael's now moving those interest rates back to 7.5%, and we're going to have a look at grabbing a second investment property. Actually, no, we're going to have a look at picking a good asset selection. Really important, isn't it? A good asset selection could smash your actual wealth outcome. So I'm now saying we're going to have a property that appreciates 10% per annum. So our investment property, our actual owner home, is going to appreciate at 7%, but this one investment property is going to appreciate at 10% per annum. Now, whilst Michael's doing the calculation, and you'll see this, the difference between 7% compounding return over 32 years versus the difference between 10% compounding return, amazing. What's that? Just on almost $5 million. So all of a sudden, by picking the right asset, or getting someone to help you pick the right asset, you're potentially going to increase your passive income in retirement by around, what we're talking, $65,000 per annum. Asset selection is critical. Now everyone says, can you get 10% compounding return? Well, in the Value and General's data, back to 1972 when they've been tracking that data, there are around 25 suburbs in Melbourne that have delivered greater than 10% capital growth returns for the last 35 years. So the answer is yes, you can get it. So you can see how capital compounding growth just smashes the outcome. So anyone who's got someone who's helping them buy a property or knows what to look for, they're worth their weight in gold. Because that difference is enormous in terms of your wealth projection. I'd still be happy with a 7% return. The actual average in Melbourne since 1974 has been 8.35. So again, we've been conservative on those numbers. Are we getting it? We're starting to see that asset selection is important, but cash flow management, getting sophisticated inputs, giving us sophisticated outputs, and then that ongoing management and gauging that you need to do is really important. All right, we're going to buy a second property. I'm conscious of time because I like to get involved in my presentations and I always go over that. And I've got 2 other presentations we want to do. So we're buying this next property for $500,000 in 2018, February of 2018. Now in this particular case, we're going to be conservative, only 7% return, thanks Michael, but we can actually increase the yield. So what we can potentially do is say, okay, we're now focused on a cash flow positive property because we're getting closer to retirement. And for the people in the audience who are closer to retirement, our strategy for you would be, we do need more yield, depending on what your wealth base is. If your wealth base is big and your cash flow is strong, then we'll focus more on capital growth. But if you need to generate income, because you don't have that time to retire the debt as quickly, because you want to retire earlier, then we will focus on yield properties as part of strategy. In this particular case, one more investment property. Who wants to earn $236,000 a year in passive retirement? Yeah, it wouldn't be bad. I think I'd be pretty happy with it. So obviously, Jason and Amy have got enormous opportunity. Are they going to do this right till they're 67? No, they're going to retire earlier. They're going to retire potentially in their mid-50s if they want to. They only wanted 80 grand. So they're going to have a choice to keep working or to stop. What a great opportunity to have, a choice to work. And that's obviously what we do. You know, this tool has been designed on my wife and my situation. And when Michael came into the business, that's exactly what we did. We were just buying investment properties. We didn't have any plan, strategy. I started when I was 23, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden now I've got a timeline, it's 50. I've got 11 years to go before I can choose to retire. And the wealth projection for us is around $240,000 a year in passive income. So I can supplement my income and retire. But I love what I do, so you'll see me out here for a little bit longer. You can get an understanding of what's happening here. Now, I wanted to talk about changing the age. And I've sort of mentioned that before. The older you are, we would change the strategy. Okay, we don't have the same sort of timelines. So what we would do is we would basically look at the timelines that we've got before the income slows down and make sure that as you transition into retirement, we have enough cash flow there to continue to retire the debt and you can live comfortably on the passive income that you're going to generate. And Michael's just taking out the school fees because we don't expect someone who's 50 years of age to be starting a family. But we're leaving everything else in there. We're going to take out the second investment properties. Actually, no, leave them in. Yeah, but we're going to change the yield strategy. So we're not going to get the capital growth because usually, and you'll hear other people contradict this, but the most important thing is if you are chasing capital growth, you usually sacrifice yield. And vice versa. If you're chasing yield, you usually give up a bit of capital growth. Because when you chase yield, you're normally going into areas where people are transient and they need to, you basically, there's a shortage of stock, like Gladstone would be a perfect example at the moment where you're getting high yields, Broome, anywhere in the mining towns and so forth, that's chasing high yield. So I don't expect you're going to see a lot of growth there. You might see a bit, but the incomes are enormous and people are transient in those communities. So your yields can be as high as 9 to 10%. In some cases, we've got clients who are up there who are getting 7 and 18% as builders because they're own building themselves for their retirement plan. So Michael's just crunched all those numbers, and that's not a bad effort. Now these guys, we've just given them the age of 50, so by 67, that's 12 years, 13 years? What am I doing?
We're going at 50, so we've got 17 years.
17 years. Oh, gosh. 17 years, and we've still got them $72,000 in passive retirement income.
And growing.
And growing. You can see, now you can see when they retire, in 17 years, they've still got a bit of debt left. But as that value grows, we're able to retire that because as the growth is going up, they're charging more rent. So they're able to retire that even after they retire. So they're taking a clip off the top, servicing the rest of the debt. They could obviously sell one property down and then retire their debt completely. So they've got options. But if ultimately they can hold on to both of them, you're giving away the goose that lays the golden egg. So why would you focus on doing that if you didn't have to? And this is all about smart money management or sophisticated money management. Does everyone understand it? Get the tool. It's powerful. It's not easy to do either. But don't let that be an excuse for you not to try it. Because you can see by doing it, we talked about buying time. By having that nest egg, putting it into our cash flow pot, we can buy time. Okay? By people who weren't potentially doing sophisticated planning, they were going to say, well, let's just get our kid out of the way first and let's just wait because really we don't have the cash flow to start that family, to grow that investment property and start a family. When in fact they had equity, which is cash flow if you crystallise it. But you've got to make sure you've got enough in reserve and you've got enough cash flows to manage through that. So just because you've done it, you always should be constantly monitoring that as part of your outcome. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
So that's money management, sophisticated money management. In summary, what we're doing, it's complex stuff, but so are most difficult things. If you don't think you can do it alone, get professional help. The rewards will outweigh the cost. You'll smash it. Like if there's a cost to advice, let's say that advice there costs you $1,000 and you have those type of wealth outcomes. You'd get it out of your pocket tomorrow, wouldn't you? Yeah? So I have to think about that. Sophisticated money management and wealth planning is about looking at you and your household. Start thinking of yourself as a business. You're generating all this money. You know, successful businesses have financial controllers. That's all Michael is. And that's what our other guys do. They're basically financial controllers for all of our clients, helping them get on their journey. And you should be able to achieve it. It's not difficult. Once you get into a routine, a discipline, and you take that action, it's possible. It is an ongoing process to make more informed decisions. The better the inputs, the better the outcomes. The more sophisticated the planning, I've just said what I've said. The better the inputs, basically the better the outcomes. And the more informed decisions you make. So when you're lying in bed at night, when you've got $1.6 million in debt, you actually feel pretty comfortable about it. Because when you've got over $3 million in assets, growing at around $300,000 a year, it's okay. It's okay. Sufficient cash flows and management of those cash flows are critical. You can't do this if you don't have strong cash flows. You can still do it if you don't have equity, but you've just got to be smart about your cash flows. So there are ways in which you can do it. And Kate's a perfect example of where she didn't have those cash flows and she started young and she got 17 properties. The more investment assets that you can control, because that's what it's about, controlling assets. We don't technically own them if we're going to be borrowing 60 or 70% against them until such time as we retire that debt or they grow in value. and we get more and more ownership of it. So it is about controlling that asset. The greater the lifestyle and the standard of living, you're going to have in retirement. The sooner you start, the earlier you'll retire. Any questions?